Hi, everyone. My name is Kumar Singh, and I'm a research director with SAPinsider. As you know, in the technology brief video series, we interview leading thought leaders and experts from the industry and specifically SAP technology ecosystem, SAP partners who have their own solution and offerings, as well as experts from SAP itself. Today, we are going to actually discuss a really interesting topic, something that actually a topic that lies at the intersection of many different aspects. And the topic is payment fraud and leveraging analytics to help companies actually mitigate this risk of payment fraud. So as you can see, it kind of intersects at the intersection of analytics, financial services, supplier management, and it's a really niche, interesting, and becoming a really critical area for many companies. And today we have the privilege to have with us one of the leading experts and thought leaders in this specific area, Akhilesh Agarwal from apexanalytix. So Akhilesh, first of all, thanks a lot for taking time to discuss this extremely important and relevant topic with us. And before we jump into discussing this topic, I would really love if you could share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
Thank you so much for this meeting, Kumar. I'm Akhilesh Agarwal. I work at apexanalytix as the COO and EVP. I manage the Apex Portal Solutions consulting division, and I'm also responsible for all of IT and R&D for Apex Portal Solutions. So really glad to be here on this call today.
Pleasure is all ours, Akhilesh. Without wasting any further time, let's jump directly into this really interesting topic. So I was mentioning earlier, it's a very niche topic at the intersection of few different functions. It's really critical. It has been, I would say, a pain point for many companies for decades, but now, thanks to technology, leveraging the power of technology and analytics, we now have tools like Apex Analytics that can actually help companies manage these aspects better. But before we kind of start doing a deep dive into that aspect, let's try to understand, like, what does everyone who is in accounts payable and procurement actually needs to know about payment fraud? Why it's critical, why it's relevant, why it's important, what it is in some cases, right? So why don't we start there?
Sure. The way I think about fraud is, and specific to payment fraud, it's a symptom of not having automated controls and compliance technology. What that means is when you have manual processes, it drags the companies into a reactive state where you're addressing all of the tasks that are required right now, but then you're not paying attention to where fraud may be happening or a potential fraud may be happening. So by inserting automation, it allows for global procure-to-pay teams to focus on critical concerns that may be coming from fraudsters. And then it also allows you to focus on strategic initiatives that drives the organization as a whole. So that's why it's very important to understand, how payment frauds come about, and then what are the benefits around it.
Makes perfect sense, and I really like the aspect that you highlighted, that it has both strategic and tactical nuances to it. So to kind of start getting a little bit deeper into this, what exactly would be a fraud incident, a typical fraud incident example that we have seen lately? If you could share a nice example or story with our audience so that they get a better understanding of what exactly a fraud incident is.
Sure. Before I get into a specific fraud incident, one benchmark or story I want to share with all of you is we conducted hundreds of vendor risk assessments for very large companies, right? And we found that a fraud exists, or a case of fraud exists, in every single one of those companies. Now, if I contrast this with the fraud perception that is out there in the market, According to our upcoming benchmark survey, 50% of procure-to-pay professionals said they did not have a case of fraud for several years, right? So fraud is not something that happens to other companies. In my opinion, it happens to every company. And whether it's a payment fraud or let's say even a cybersecurity incident, many companies claim that they had none. Whereas my opinion is you just don't know about it, right? So that's the fundamental starting point. You got to be cognizant of the fact that it may be happening and you're just not aware of it. And one recent story to your question I want to share is a lot of recent frauds have been tied to the suppliers network getting compromised. And by that I mean, if I'm a supplier and I have my work email, that is either shared with other people because it's a group mailbox in the AR department. So I'm not using a work email that is assigned to me specifically, or the password is compromised because the supplier got impacted by a ransomware or a malware incident, right? And with that, what happens is the supplier is able to, or the fraudster, I must say, is able to pretend that they are the actual suppliers and they are able to initiate a payment fraud, right? And a payment fraud can be initiated in so many different ways, but the most likely way of initiating a payment fraud is typically that my bank account has changed. Please pay me in a different bank account, right? So that's the most prevailing type of incident in the industry. Tied to this specific incident, I actually have a nice story to share where it started with, hey, please change my bank account. And then when this client of ours asked for evidence, we noticed even a specific pattern in that evidence being provided. So as you can see, I'm sharing a fake document that was provided by one of the suppliers. So it started with, first we got a bank account change request document. As we were reviewing the bank account change document, the client noticed several irregularities, right? One of these was the PDF had multiple layers within the document. So if you imagine a single page image that was shared by the supplier as evidence of a ACH form, for example, that image had several layers, which was not seen with the human eyes as you open the document. But if you dig into the technical details of the PDF, we noticed several layers, which indicated that this imposter had used a similar document for multiple incidents of fraud with many other customers of that supplier. So the last page in the document that I'm sharing indicates multiple bank account change requests, and they would have likely attempted to defraud several of the clients of this supplier. So that's a great recent story about fraud, but fortunately, this client had one of the greatest technologies, and they were able to prevent that fraud from happening.
Really interesting. I really like the fact, the observation that you highlighted in the beginning of your answer is that when you audit your customers, clients across industries, you find fraud in almost all of their, in at least some incident of fraud in all of those accounts. But in surveys, 50% of them, they believe they did not have a fraud in X years because they do not know it actually. And that's the reason they think that there was no incident of fraud. And there's a very popular saying that goes that you cannot improve what you do not measure or what you do not know about. So certainly there is a big, a very I would say important need for companies to have those capabilities, right? And the example that you were mentioning about that multi-layered PDF, right? It's the kind of sophistication that many companies may not be equipped with, to kind of detect the sophistication being used in terms of fraud. So I guess the next key question is, now that we know that fraud is happening across companies and companies actually do not know about it, and they want to believe that there's no fraud happening within their transactions. What are some of the key tactics that companies should be using or they should be leveraging to identify these kind of frauds in their system?
Sure. So there is both a preventative measure that you can take, but before you go into the preventive measures, there's also what you can do today, for example, right, to get a great jump start. There are two ways you can get a good start on this fraud prevention process. So one of them is your AP team can analyze your supplier base for those red flags. And how do you analyze it? Uh, One way to analyze this is comparing your employee data with the vendor data, right? Because that basically helps you audit whether there's any collusion activities or insider fraud happening within your company or not. And with very large organizations or even the smaller ones, we see this happening from time to time. So when you're matching your employee data with your vendor data, you should compare the address of the vendor with the address of your employees or their associates, right? The phone number of the employees or the tax ID, whether it's the employee's SSN matching the vendor's sole proprietor SSN number, right? And lastly, the bank account of the vendor matching with a vendor's or an employee matching the vendor's bank account, right? So those are some of the checks which results in a great outcome where you can analyze the data and see where there's potential fraud going on. Now, it would be great to include everything, but sometimes legal may push back, right? Saying you can or cannot access employee data for privacy reasons, right? So the more matching you can do, the better it is from a fraud mitigation perspective. Now, if you have a vendor and an employee with the same phone number, for example, right, a huge red flag should get raised. Same with other data elements. And this will expose the employees who are engaged in this type of fraud. Now, that's not the only type of fraud. There are others. One other example I can give is for non-employee fraudsters, I would have every bank account validated. And when you're validating the bank account, it's not is the account valid or is the bank valid, right? It's all about the ownership of that bank account, right? So how can you effectively validate if the account belongs to the supplier or not? And you can do this in several different countries worldwide today, US, India, Poland, Sweden, and a few other countries. But what about other countries? And for other countries, it's important to figure out, okay, has the supplier used that bank account before to get a payment, maybe with another client of that supplier, and how long have they used that bank account, right? So there are different ways to validate it, but those are the two controls that can be used to get a jump start.
Makes perfect sense. Not only some of the controls, the key controls that you mentioned, kind of make perfect sense, as in when you were walking us through those aspects, it kind of some of those aspects are like, okay, it's common sense. But then if you think about sometimes millions of transactions that companies actually kind of get involved in that goes through their system, and the way some of these are monitored or managed manually, it's kind of difficult for companies to uh, keep a track or be proactive about fraudulent activities. And that this is where technology comes into play, and it's interesting because it's kind of a double-edged sword. So on one hand, fraudsters are leveraging technology, using more sophisticated technology to commit fraud. But on the other hand, there is technology that is actually helping companies, technology like apexanalytix that is helping companies manage, be proactive about it, stop fraud before it happens, or detect fraud if it has already happened, in a very sophisticated way, leveraging the power of computing and technology. So based on your experience, like we have been talking about the problems and you suggested some of the ways that companies can kind of try to identify fraud in their system, how do you stop how do you approach actually stopping fraud? And with some tidbits on how technology can actually help do that. What's your perspective?
Sure. That's a great question. And there is not one magic bullet, if you will, to prevent a fraud, right? Because it's a constantly evolving situation. As technology gets better and better, even the fraudsters leverage those type of technologies to mitigate or get around the controls, right? So it's a evolutionary process, and that's why it's very important to uh, subscribe to a technology which kind of evolves on a daily basis as well in terms of preventing those frauds. So that's a starting point. Right now, what type of technologies everyone should look at? At least two types of controls in any technology, like a supplier portal. So one is get rid of the unencrypted data exchange, right? And by that I mean no transactions like a bank account change should be done over emails, right? Most companies we deal with have great data encryption processes in place, right? So when we ask questions like, hey, do you encrypt data? Yes, data at rest and data in transit is encrypted, right? Um, uh, so, but when you're actually transacting with your suppliers, you end up exchanging tax ID numbers, phone numbers, addresses, bank account numbers over emails. And there you go. Now you have all this unencrypted data residing in someone's mailbox, waiting, to be taken advantage of. So that layer has to go away. Why that layer also has to go away with a supplier portal like technology is because you do not have a way today to validate if the email came from the person is the who's present in the from address, right? There's no authentication on email today. So what that means is when you're processing a request for a bank account change, you're applying your best guess as a human to figure out whether I should or should not change it, right? There's no definitive answer in your mind. But with the supplier portal, you can authenticate the request. And with authentication, there should be additional layers like multi-factor authentication, right? Authentication if the supplier still has access to their work email instead of their cell phone or personal emails, right? So authentication or multi-factor authentication should take care of authenticating supplier's work email. That's number one. Where are they logging in from? The IP address of the supplier. Are they logging from different time zones or different time windows like 2 a.m. in the morning versus business hours, right? So there's a whole set of pattern detection of anomalies which can be put into the authentication layer. So that's a great protection to start with. Second is, okay, now that you have authenticated the user that yes, they are who they claim to be, even then, what kind of data validations do you have in place? Is the tax ID matching an employee, for example? Do you have automation in that? And is the tax ID correct? Is the address correct? And then lastly, when they're changing the bank account number, do they know the original bank account number on file? Because if it is an imposter, they'll likely not know that number. So they should be asked for that before they can change to a new number. And then I talked about bank account ownership for several countries, so that should be in place. And there is also a confidence score, which can be generated in a supplier portal, which is how many times that particular bank account has been used in the past, how many other clients are making payments to that supplier on that account. Is that account belonging to the country of the supplier? In most cases, it should. There are a few exceptions. So having a supplier portal which can incorporate all of these checks and balances in an automated fashion, is the key to success here.
Definitely. And those were some beautiful examples that you kind of walked us through. And as you're walking through the examples, to me, it was very much clear that you really need a kind of a technology solution which is designed and which has expertise in this specific area. So having said that, I think we have kind of gone through a very nice overview of this specific niche capability. Like I mentioned, a really niche area intersecting many different functions. But before I let you go, Akhilesh, I would like to tap a little bit more into your expertise and your company's expertise. It will be great if you could share some examples of you guys have implemented the solution across industries globally. If you could share some examples of how this solution, I would say, not only has helped your clients, but when asset insiders are looking to embark on a journey of building this kind of capability to investing in solution, what are some of the key aspects they should look for? What are some of the potholes that they should be watching for when they embark on this kind of a journey? Really love to hear some thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. And that's a great question. So I would like to start by sharing that a client of ours, they implemented the portal recently. They used to have instances of attempted fraud, as we discussed earlier, right? Preventing or trying to prevent it manually, right? But after they implemented the Apex portal, it has resulted in a net zero fraud for this particular client. And that's what they shared with us. And I was really excited in solving this problem for them. What Apex portal provides is the automation across all of your supplier management and specifically within the bank account change requests, right? So that the vendor master team can focus on fraudulent activity. So think about it like this. This client was getting 500 bank account changes every month. Now, prior to implementing the portal, they had to do all of these checks and due diligence manually, right? So a lot of time and energy went or goes into this process. And then if you're doing something manually, it's always prone to human error and mistakes. So what if you miss out on one control? Or you did not do it effectively, right? So there's a chance of human error. But if you have analytics and automation in a portal like Apex portal, then let's say the portal identifies out of the 500 changes, you only have to focus on those 3 which are standing out with red flags. Now you can dramatically reduce the human effort. And there's a much higher chance of preventing the fraud from a lurking fraudster, right? So that's the net benefit of implementing our solutions, and I'm just sharing real life client experiences. So yeah, I would highly encourage anyone to look out for a supplier portal and specifically ask questions like, what does the supplier portal have in their roadmap for preventing fraud, right? Whether it's authentication, whether it's different validations or automation in terms of workflows.
Makes perfect sense. And again, like I was mentioning earlier, a really insightful discussion, Akhilesh. I'm pretty sure that our audience that has been really interested actually based on our research and conversations that we regularly have with SAPinsiders. Our audience has been really interested in this topic. So I'm pretty sure they will take many useful pieces of information from this discussion. If any listener or viewer has any questions for Akhilesh, feel free to send them my way and I will be more than happy to share it with him. And thanks for listening. And Akhilesh, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it. We can understand how busy you are. So really grateful that you were able to take some time to discuss this topic with us. And we would love to have you again, maybe in the future, to share, to discuss that topic in the same area of expertise. Thanks a lot, Akhilesh.
Thank you, Kumar. And it was a pleasure talking to you today.